January the 5th, 2021. Welcome, everybody. I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclearproctologist.org. And it's the second show of 2022, January the 5th, 2022. At the beginning of each year, you got to kind of repeat the date because you were saying in 2021 for 12 months, right? It's pretty easy to revert back. Food is banned from 14 prefectures, originally in 55 countries, and they're grown food right alongside of nuclear waste, these 1-ton bags, and there's thousands of them right there, and grown food right alongside of it. Shows you a complete disconnect of the entire nuclear industry has sat in silence while this has happened. All universities, all medias worldwide sat in silence. I come out and defended the practice of growing poison food and distributing it to unsuspecting consumers worldwide. This story is, the first story is a mad story. This is absurd. TEPCO slow to respond to growing crisis at Fukushima plant. What you're looking at, allegedly, is pictures of the ALP system, which is allegedly reprocessing, where they filter radioactive water that was sprayed over melted reactor cores, and you can't actually do that. Now, the idea is to trick you so you become complacent and don't pay attention, and to mitigate the future criticism of them poisoning the Pacific Ocean, and also to protect the reputation of the nuclear industry to connect it worldwide. And so this truck you see here, this container, they allegedly have 3,373 of these containers. They're claiming the containers in the next 3 years, because they have radiation sludge left over from the alleged reprocessing, which I'll explain to you coming up, is going to be 5,000 sieverts cumulative doses of the containers. Now, if you go back and look at the old radioactive fallout government, where they wanted you to build radioactive fallout shelters in the 60s and 50s and 70s. What they wanted you to do was have 4 feet thick walls, because just the radioactive particulates falling out of the sky can pulse energy. These atoms, by the way, you can put 2 million on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. And one of those atoms can pulse through 4 foot thick walls of wood or dirt. So when you're talking about 5,000 sieverts, these are absurd doses. 5 sieverts is a lethal doses to all species, particularly humans, of course. So radioactive waste generated from treating highly contaminated water, this is a fable I'll explain to you, has thrown up a new nightmarish challenge. Project supposed to be completed in 30 years looks increasingly doubtful. What is doubtful is that you're filtering this, because the filters now are so radioactive you can never get close to them. And at 5,000 sieverts, you can't get anywhere close to the building. And that if you took 5,000 sieverts on the back of these trucks here, the driver will die instantly. You can't shield people from these types of doses. We don't have the technology. And that if they're moving just regular fuel, they need 100,000 pound containers. actually heavier than that, 100-ton containers. The continuous accumulation of radioactive slurry, and other nasty substances. Complete disregard for science. One problem is the storage containers for the tainted slurries, tainted. And you hear the word leaking is another word they like to use to downplay. And this is symmetrical throughout medias, and universities will utilize those tactics to disarm you. It's actually not radioactive slurry, it's radioactive fuel particles. Calling it tainted slurry, whoever wrote that should never be allowed to write an article again. Now, they claim they got 1,000 tanks. We counted the tanks. There's 750. And that included the little tiny tanks. So there's not 1,000 tanks there. There was actually 1,000 tanks there in 2013. 1,200 tanks in 2014. 900 tanks in 2017. And 1,000 tanks in 2019, 1,000 tanks again in 2021. So what's going on? 1,000 tanks. They had 1,000 tanks in 2013 and 1,000 tanks allegedly in 2021. But when you count the tanks, there's many, many pictures available online. And being generous, I was only able to accommodate 600 or 750 tanks. One problem is the storage containers for, again, the word tainted slurry is an incredible disingenuous depiction. Degrade quickly, meaning they constantly have to be replaced. The doses we're talking about, you can't replace these. You can't take it out and put it in another container. Despite the urgency of the situation, little has been done to resolve the matter because the ELP system didn't actually work, as I'll show you. I got the documentation of it coming up in a little tiny bit. Fuel debris is solidified mixture of nuclear fuel, not slurry, not tainted, but fuel, and structures inside the reactors melted. Consequences of, it was actually 4 buildings had lost their entire inventories. That included decades of reactor cores stored at the top of the buildings in fuel pools, which they refused to acknowledge. Again, we see this consistency of refusing to acknowledge. Has to be constantly cooled with water, mixes with groundwater, rainwater, seeps into the buildings, producing more new radioactive water. The contaminated water that accumulates is processed via an advanced liquid processing system to remove most of the radioactive materials, which is fuel. The ALPS, which is the advanced liquid processing system that they're claiming, is housed in a 17-meter tall building situated close to the center of the plant site. So they had 2 systems. So August 12, 2014, that's 3.5 years after the nuclear meltdown started, TEPCO to abandon the Riva system, which was France's system. For the last 3 years, the system has been unused and kept out of operation. So it didn't work. Then the fable of the ELP system, April the 21st, 2014, is a year and 1 month, 3 years and 1 month after the nuclear meltdowns. So that's the most crucial moments, right? The first 3 years. In this case, it's the first 3,000 years. The advanced liquid processing system, known as the ALPS, has yet to function reliably. That's 2014. The utility which operates Fukushima, the Yat-sen plant, which is actually nationalized, it's the government because TEPCO doesn't exist anymore. It went bankrupt immediately. treat all contaminated water by March 2015. A goal is now emitting will not be realized. So March 2015, they still had no way they emit of treating the water, which is well over 4 years later. There's no catching up to this, by the way, and I'll explain to you in a minute. There are certain parts of the site we don't even have full control. And what they mean by that is it's lethal doses all around the site. If you go in there, you'll actually die. And this is why we see a shortage of homeless people throughout Japan. Some of the numbers we're talking about is 100 million becquerels per cubic centimeter of the sludge. This is the Machini, June the 10th, 2011. The treated water at the tsunami hit plant is estimated to contain 100 million becquerels of radioactivity. As I just showed you, the ALPS and the Riva water filtration systems didn't work. And what's going on is that when you're putting these kind of numbers through a filtration system within a half an hour to an hour, the filters are so radioactive you actually won't be able to get back inside the buildings. That's why they weren't used. And they admit that the ones that they did try to use were so contaminated they couldn't get close to it again. And you'll also see those attributes for the glassification facilities where they build these things. They claim once they switch it on, they won't be able to get inside the buildings again. Reporters from the Japan's National Press Club, which we've covered, these are pathetic, useful idiots for the industry, were granted a rare opportunity in November to visit the crippled, which is an insult to what's going on to call it crippled, facility to observe the process, which they're trying to give it credibility, street creds, by saying, well, we invited the press in, right? But in reality, when you talk about a rare opportunity, why is it a rare opportunity if they got it under control? And rare opportunity is right because there are the same people that helped cover up the official story, or produce the official story, which is a propaganda story meant to indoctrinate the planet in increments over time. Strontium readings of the generated slurry, again, these words slurry, these are fuel pellets we're actually talking about, sometimes reaches tens of millions of becquerels per cubic centimeter. I showed you it was 100 million becquerels. TEPCO started keeping slurry in special vessels in 2013. But as I showed you, the ALPS system wasn't working in 2014, neither the ALPS nor the Uriva, the French systems. And they obviously, if they didn't work by then, they ain't going to be working by now. As of November, it had 3,373 of those containers. And the containers are that gray one in the back of the truck, or the white one in the back of the truck right there, what they're talking about. This is a fantasy, by the way, because the numbers they're talking about that would be inside of this means, first off, your camera can't work in this environment. And second off, a human can't survive around those numbers. Because the integrity of the vessels deteriorate quickly due to exposure to radiation from the slurry. The Nuclear Regulation Authority, which has never set foot on the site, that we have evidence to back up those assertions, predict the durability of the containers will reach the limits after exposure to accumulated total of 5,000 kilograys of radiation, a level equivalent to 5 million sieverts. So if there was 5 million sieverts a mile away from you, and by the time my show's over, you would probably be dead. That's from a mile away. if you got 5 million sieverts and 3,373 of those containers, you're talking about 16.7 billion, 16.8 billion sieverts. These tanks, these containers are not thick enough to shield you from a sievert, let alone 1,000 sieverts. Now, the accumulated dose means that the metal is being bombarded with neutrons, and so now the metal itself is extremely radioactive. Now becomes radioactive too, and it breaks. It's also known as the Wigner effect. It breaks the integrity of the metal, so it's very fragile. So if you hit it with a hammer, you can split it wide open. For instance, it becomes what's known as brittle, and all nuclear power plants, their original charters were for 30 years because the entire site becomes brittle from neutron bombardments. The NRA accused TEPCO of underestimating the impact of the radiation problem that blasted the operator. So this is meant, the whole story is meant to make you believe that they're filtering water. The slurry density of 20 centimeters above the base of the containers when making. So you're not going to, like, the numbers they're talking about, for goodness sakes. So they're claiming that they're reaching down into the containers with Geiger counters and measuring the radiation that way. You can't actually do something like that with the numbers they're talking about. You can't open containers up. A human's organs will immediately start melting. They will die within a few moments. Not a minute or 2 minutes, but within a few moments. It's a complete fable. And they have to tell that story because it's a depiction of what would happen if they actually were able to accomplish that. And certainly Russia couldn't accomplish it. Miyagi couldn't accomplish it. The Hanford Reservation couldn't accomplish any of these things. And we're supposed to believe that the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language are somehow able to survive in that environment. August, TEPCO conducted tests where slurry with relatively low radiation readings. This slurry is impossible to have low radiation readings that they're talking about. Were moved from one container to another. The work took more than a month to complete due to mechanical troubles, other reasons. The actual numbers they're talking about, you can't take this radiation out of the containment. Right? It's not like it's an assembly where you can just lift it out and move it somewhere. Think of an oil filter. And so the oil filter, you can't clean it like conventionally and have it be functional again, for instance, afterwards. You can't, if you try to clean it, like the average person tried to clean out an oil filter from their automobile, a dirty oil filter. I'm not sure if people are familiar with it. So a level equivalent to 5 million sieverts. Everybody that walks past it dies immediately. So if every human on the planet and every animal and bird and insect and on this planet walked past one of these containers, they would all die that day. So imagine if you had 3,373 of these containers. You can't contain the emit, like it's going to emit out of these containers very long distances, 50, 60 feet would be lethal doses. If they were actually able to filter it, if the numbers they're talking about was actually real, you couldn't get in the truck and move a container. TEPCO is currently considering what steps to take, including covering the workspace with plastic sheets. First off, just radioactive fallout from an atomic bomb detonation. You need 4 feet thick wood to stop the radiation from pulsing through it. The radioactive fallout is like snow, right? Looks like, think of snow is a way to think of it when it's falling. That energy alone can pulse through 4 feet of wood, for instance. And so plastic sheets at 5,000 or say 1,000 sieverts, these are absurd numbers. A sievert is an actual absurd number. 1,000 is an unthinkable, unconscionable number. Level equal to 5 million sieverts is an extinction number for all humans. You can't survive proximity to emitters of these. This is the most terrifying creature, most terrifying thing imaginable is something at 5 million sieverts. It's a lethal dose. It's impossible to survive it. You have to wear a 4 foot thick lead suit. And I don't think that would actually work. Slurry in some containers in need of replacement have strontium levels more than 1,000 times that of the one in the August test, 1,000 times more. The immediate aftermath, TEPCO stored contaminated water underground spaces. So the contaminated water, if you splash it over your car and then you power washed your car is a lethal dose for till the end of time. You can't actually remove the radiation. It's impermeated through the entire metal of the vehicles. It's permanent. So bags full of, they're talking about how they allegedly, in the basement of the buildings, where they stored this, they stored it. It wasn't really true what happened. This is stuff that washed down there. The bags full of minerals known as zeolite were placed in temporary storage pools to absorb cesium, which is a gamma. So why don't they acknowledge alpha and betas and neutrons? Because the story is too complicated to hoodwink the entire population, would say. 26 tons of the stuff immersed in dirty water on the floor under the building, and radiation readings of 4 sieverts per hour were detected under surfaces in 2019, enough to kill all the people in the immediate vicinity within an hour. 4 sieverts will do that. They're talking about thousands and thousands of sieverts in order to get 4 sieverts. Like, you know how if I got 6 cans or 6 bottles of water that are 1 liter each, and I got a 1 liter pot there, and if I try to pour all 6 liters into the pot, they're not going to fit the pot, right? So this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to trick you into thinking that it's just, so it's going to be 4 sieverts, 4 sieverts, 4 sieverts, 4 sieverts, 4 sieverts, 4 sieverts per square foot, which is accumulation of thousands of sieverts. It's a despicable industry. It's a disgusting industry. It'll kill all the people within moments. You can't possibly get back into that area. You're talking about so much radiation, it's lethal doses. There's no way to clean it up, period. 26 tons of these bags, these are, say, 25-pound bags. At the top of each bag is 4 sieverts. So when you add all the surfaces up, it's thousands of sieverts is what we're talking about. In addition, radioactive rubble, soil, and radioactive trees total 480,000 cubic meters. They built new incinerators at that site so they can burn these dirty bombs. It's an industry that the whole world is supposed to be rallying for common sense right now and for solutions. Instead, we have this bizarre, hateful death cult known as nuclear, exterminating our planet in increments, leading TEPCO to set up special incinerators. You don't burn radiation because you release it, liberate it back into the environment. You can't destroy it by incinerating it at 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. The total volume is expected to be 790,000 cubic meters in 10 years. But where to dispose of the incinerated waste? So the waste left over is extremely radioactive. And we've covered this many times where they claim that when they incinerate it, the radiation stays in the ash. This is absurd. It's absurdness. It's revolting, and it's deadly for our planet. Common sense has to prevail, but it can't prevail without a real dialogue, and they're not willing to have any conversations that are realistic whatsoever. Fukushima town prepares for return of the victims. This is madness, where you're going to send people into Futaba, which is 2 kilometers away from ongoing nuclear meltdowns, and 2 kilometers away from Billion Sieverts. So you shouldn't be in the town. And they're not actually returning to the town. They're not allowed to. They're not actually. Just very complacent people will go back there. Anybody that's paying any attention wouldn't dream of going to these communities. They're holding this in Iwate, not in the Futaba community itself. And you can see they got Pokemon. They got a Pokemon, which is absurd. It's like having Ronald McDonald or Mickey Mouse there in order to trick and deceive and coerce and manipulate people and vulnerable people into going back into harm's way. You know, I'm just trying to bring common sense to a very, very, very incredibly difficult topic. And we have been betrayed by every single university on this planet, by every single media on this planet, have both been captured by the industry in increments over decades. The regulatory industries do not exist whatsoever. They are the industry. And they have also captured key positions in our governments worldwide. This was a methodical takeover of our planet, and now they are proceeding to exterminate all the species in increments at an accelerated pace at this stage. Fukushima prepares for returns to residents in a nuclear wasteland. There's only a little tiny fraction of the place where you're allowed to go. And this is Futaba. Just thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and millions, rather, of 1-ton bags. And they got a video to driving through the city really fast for some reason. But you can see the destroyed buildings. It's at the very end of that clip, and you can see these bags. It's very telling, yes? Very frightening that this industry is willing to go to these levels. Again, you're seeing these bags. What they're doing is they're cutting the bags open, they're spreading it out, and they're actually growing food in it, which we covered many times. I'm sure it doesn't seem possible to the average person, but it certainly is. Tuesday marked the first business day, 2022 in Japan, and officials in the Fukushima prefecture's Futaba town are planning to welcome residents back that year. But they were actually in Iwate, dozens and dozens of kilometers away. They weren't actually in Futaba. Do you get the irony of that? They didn't go to Futaba because it's so dangerous. The nuclear industry wants people to go back there so the nuclear industry can pretend that things are not so bad. And I think that's criminal, easy to prove that that's a criminal, that's attempted murder. The town's residents have not returned since the nuclear meltdown. They call it an accident, forced them to evacuate, and part of the plant is located in the same town. It's still melting down. After years of decontamination efforts, not by universities, not by academics, not by scientists, but by victims of society. The residents, the victims, are expected to be irradiated starting in June. The event took place in a town office in Iwate City. So if it was safe there, why didn't they do it in Futaba? And Iwate is located 60 kilometers south of the center of the Futaba town. Beginning January the 20th of this year, residents will be permitted to stay overnight in the town in order to start preparing for their return. Again, these are crazy global food safety topics for 2022. The World Health Organization, which is United Nations, which is an incredible betrayal. This is the military-industrial complex. This is not a World Health. This is the military-industrial complex. And the Food and Agricultural Organizations of the United Nations. Well, World Health Organization is United Nations, and the agricultural organizations are United Nations. Are publishing updated food safety strategies. This is a corporation that is trying to set the standards for everybody. Imagine if Walmart come out and told you when you had to go to bed and when you had to get up every day. It's the same thing. The 75th World Health Assembly this is shortly, they were created immediately and in the ashes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Comment period is ongoing in UK, because UK is going to start importing food from the nuclear wasteland. And I covered this. Another complication is while England can do one thing, Wales and Scotland may do another because of the BRICS and because of the EU. It's an incredible betrayal. It's not tenable. It's not acceptable. Tohoku disaster housing used to help the homeless in Hawaii. Used to help the homeless. This is absurdness. They built these temporary structures to keep people in the Fukushima radioactive land. These structures by proxy are extremely radioactive. After several years, they decided they wanted the people to move back into the radioactive wasteland, so they took away their housings. And then a Japanese organization in Hawaii started buying these radioactive buildings and shipped them to Hawaii to put the homeless into. Not to give it to them, but to charge them rent. Food import issues crucial to ties with Japan, says academic. So Japan has started a trade pact because nobody wants their products. So they started up their own trade pact, which is absurd, by the way. You have to be insane to trust any products from Japan. And that's just terrifying that we live in that environment now. Relaxing restrictions on food imports from a nuclear wasteland is crucial to Taiwan's relationship. So if Taiwan wants to have a relationship with Japan, they need to poison everybody in Taiwan. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This nuclear industry has no right to exist. It has no right to exist. These are criminals and parasites. These are not people. They have none of the attributes of humanity. International Energy Agency projects rosy future for renewable energy, but where's the materials? What happened is renewables now become so cheap. The industry's jacked the price up because nuclear can't be competitive. So the simple way around that is just jack up the prices of the resources. It's a hateful industry. It's an incredible hateful industry. By 2026, renewable energy will account for 95% of all new capacity to the entire planet's power generation. Renewables will be 95% in 2026. The cost of raw material used to manufacture renewable energy, also known as RE-based technology, has been on the rise. The commodity is on the rise. The price of silicon, a key component in solar, has quadrupled since the beginning of 2020. Has gone 4 times more expensive. Steel cost increased, doubled, or 50%. Aluminum by 80% and copper by 60%. And freight rates have gone up 6-fold, 6 times. So they're trying to drive up the price of renewables to slow it down and even to stop it. Because it embarrasses the nuclear industry. Renewables, like coal, carbon, or fossil fuels and renewable and nuclear can't compete. And so the best thing to do is throttle the industry, which is what South Africa done about 5 years ago, by the way. They throttled the nuclear industry, or the renewable industries. The nuclear industry was at the bottom of all that. The International Energy Agency estimated the entire investment cost of utility-scale PVs onshore wind facilities will rise by another 25% as a result of the commodity and freight prices. But wind solar competitive is despite these rising prices. Tidal energy has potentially become viable and reliable renewable energy sources. So you can calculate the tide movements, the tide schedule, 300 years out down to the second. So for the next 300 years, you can guarantee to know exactly what the tide is going to do. 24 hours a day, every 1,440 minutes a day, you're guaranteed to know exactly which way the tide is going to flow, what the strength is going to be for the next 300 years. So you're not counting on sun or wind, you're counting on the moon. And the moon is extremely reliable. And there's many, many ways to harvest, and this technology has been suppressed and hasn't been given much attention whatsoever. But we're starting to see development of this technology in increments, and it's not promising. It's mind-boggling how effective it is, how incredibly useful it actually is. Launched last week a total of $20 million per year, which is nothing. It's nothing. If you want to develop a technology, $20 million a year is not how you're going to do it. Particularly if they're screeching and whining and sniveling about carbon, how they got to cut the carbon. Carbon doesn't heat up the planet, by the way. Carbon doesn't pulse energy every second. There's only one thing on this planet that pulses energy every second, That is radioactive materials, man-made anthropogenic radiation. This model is based on 20 days of radioactive fallout from Japan. And if you let the model go for another 10 days, the rest of the planet disappears. So they cut the model off at 20 days. See that? March 31st. It's not a game, folks. Like, we could have solved our energy crisis a couple of decades ago if it wasn't suppressed by this hateful death cult known as nuclear. Launched last week, and they're suppressing it even today. The energy potential of tides can be predicted for years to come, with tidal turbines able to harness the energy of high and low tides down to the minute. It's actually, they can predict 300 years into the future with accuracy, 100% accuracy. French nuclear closures send electric prices soaring. So France is talking about another nuclear renaissance. But why did they wait till the end of their life of their current reactors? Why did they wait so long? Why did they wait till the very last minute to make that decision? It's because the nuclear industry is insidiously stupid and evil. It's not just evil, it's stupid also. France has multiple, these are all old reactors. France has no young reactors, they're all old reactors. They're all brittle and they're all breaking down. And now they're left in an energy crisis. They also have incredible flaws into them, which they're finally admitting to, and are forced to shut down because the reactors are very brittle. And the problem with that is that these are high-pressure reactors. They're minimum of 1,000 psi to 2,200 psi. And so something that's brittle can't contain that anymore. France gets about 70% of its stupid electricity from nuclear power. And France is now going to lead a push to classify them as climate friendly. And what they done was the EU delayed making a decision on the so-called EU taxonomy, where they declare a technology green so investors can invest in it. They delayed it right up until now, which is now, France is now the presidency of the EU for the next 6 months. You talk about betrayals? Welcome to nuclear. It's such a revolting bunch of people. I should call them creatures, I guess. Leads a push to have them classified as climate friendly. There is no such thing as climate friendly. I'll show you what I mean. Just the emissions from all the fuel pools worldwide, there's over 1,000 of them that we know about, will cause these plumes, permanent plumes, covering our planet. This particular plume is 19 days. The whole planet is covered in radioactive fallout, pulsing energy every second at the speed of light. Do you know of any technology that pulses energy at the speed of light? It has incredible amount of energy to do something like that. This is the very reason, by the way, we have terrorist laws. And the nuclear industry is, by proxy, the biggest terrorist organization in history. And now are exterminating most of the species on the planet as we talk. And I quantify that by doing research for a decade. 6 years going to Alaska each year on the ocean for 4 to 5 months, counting species. And we have shown an actual extinction event that is denied worldwide and was suppressed. The information was suppressed, and then I was demonized for doing the research. And I had hundreds of people attacking me for going out and taking pictures of the coastline with the GPSs to show unequivocally that the species were missing. I was considered an evil person for dare using a camera. How dare I use a camera? Safety inspectors found faults in 2 reactors and had to shut down another 2 with the same design. And so therefore now they don't have enough power to make it through the winter. It'd take them 10 to 15 years to build a reactor. The reactor's not expected to open until next year, well into next year. And it was a serious fault, otherwise they wouldn't have taken it offline. Again, you got to remember, these are high pressure systems. So a flaw could explode quite easily, right? Germany, the biggest player in the anti-nuclear camp. Anti-nuclear. No, the common sense camp. The moral high ground camp. You're not anti-nuclear, you're a good person. Putting a label on you like anti-nuclear, as if nuclear is good. So pro-nuclear by proxy is stupid. It's the stupid nuclear, pro-nuclear industry. You actually got to be stupid to be pro-nuclear. Nuclear Regulatory Commission foot dragging on patients' irradiation suggests regulatory capture. Well, you don't have to suggest a regulatory capture for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Everybody knows they're captured. It's like having a security guard, how do you put this? The nuclear regulatory is supposed to be a security guard. Think of it that way. And thereby, but they're also supposed to be, they're supposed to be impartial. They're supposed to be able to look at just the documentation and give a proper diagnosis. And they've never done it. Not in their entire history, we don't got any kind of evidence whatsoever of them being impartial. So regulatory capture. But this story is quite frightening. They're talking about irradiation of people. The threshold is supposed to be 0.5 sieverts, which requires nuclear medicine providers should disclose unintentional irradiation of patients' skin or tissue above a radiation dose threshold of 0.5 sieverts. It's about 500 times the radiation dose skin or tissue would normally receive in a nuclear medicine imaging procedure. 0.5 sieverts. 40 years ago, that's almost a lifetime ago with regards to medical advances. On advice from the nuclear medicine practitioners it regulates, the captured Nuclear Regulatory Commission implemented a policy exempting extravastations, radiopharmaceutical injections, inadvertently delivered onto a patient's tissue rather than into the vein. My goodness. From being reported to patients themselves, referring physicians, state regulatories, and the NRC itself, no matter how high a radiation dose the patient receives. So if it's on their skin, it ends up on their pillows, it ends up in the laundry, it ends up contaminating the entire cycle, right? Exemption. An exemption. From being reported to patients, my goodness. But the numbers are terrifying. You're talking about 100 sieverts. The policy resulted in radiation and inconsistent applications of criteria for medical events reporting. Today, a provider must report if a radiopharmaceutical is leaked onto a patient's skin or clothing during a nuclear medicine procedure, but does not have to report if a radiopharmaceutical has leaked onto the patient's arm tissues. In November 2000, 2019, some of the radiopharmaceutical leaks onto a patient's skin, resulting in an estimated dose of 7 sieverts. These are not pharmaceuticals, this is genocide. 14 times the reporting limits and 7,000 times the dose the skin should have received. 7,000 times the dose. And therefore it was required to be reported to the NRC, since it takes time for ionizing radiation to cause visible harm. Skin injuries develop 4 days later. The same radiopharmaceutical into a patient's arm was presented at a recent Health Physics Society meeting. In this case, they estimated that all of the radiopharmaceuticals may have ended up in the patient's arm tissue, not the vein. Yet this mishandling of the radiopharmaceutical was deemed not reportable, even though a reasonable estimate of the dose to the patient's tissues exceeded 100 sieverts. You can't cure people. Like, if I take this same stuff and say you're healthy and I stick it in you, that's a crime. That's attempted murder, by the way. This using... Now, I've done entire presentations with academic studies only on this subject. And you destroy all the organs in the body to try to get rid of a tumor. I apologize for giving a shit. I wish you did too. And I'm sure most of you do that are following this. I'm not talking to those that... I'm talking to the industry when I talk like that. For the past 41 years, the Non-Regulatory Commission, OWN Advisory Committee on the Medical Uses of Isotopes, which there is no medical uses of isotopes. Your body attacks the isotopes in your body with white blood cells for the rest of your life and builds a tumor around it in increments over a decade or two, which is populated by the nuclear medicine professionals, which are mass murderers, or genocide machines, has sought to protect this reporting exemption. In other words, keep the exemptions in place is what they're trying to do. 2008, 2009, the Non-Regulatory Committee specifically asked the committee if this exemption should continue, instead of telling them that it shouldn't. A transcript, page 170 of the meetings, where this was discussed, showed that committee members knew that some patients were receiving high doses of radiation as a result of human error, referring to an example where a patient might receive a dose of 6 to 10 times the reporting threshold. An advisory committee member expressed concern about extra work like this, said, "Now, if we consider this as a medical event, if we go through all the procedures and identify whatever, 3 or 4 or 5 sieverts, well, each of that makes a difference. 3, 4, and 5 is a huge difference in numbers, by the way. The patient will have to be informed. The physicians will have to be informed, blah, blah, blah. And then you have to go into all the reporting mechanisms, and therefore I am thoroughly against this being reported as a medical event." It's called contempt. It's called murder. This is murder. It's straight up murder what they're doing. This is murder to inject radiation into humans. Minutes later, the group voted unanimously to recommend the Nuclear Regulatory Commission retain the exemption, and it complied. So it's not a regulatory. It's obviously captured. This recommendation was not based on science, but on convenience. In 2019, a medical device company provides an approach to help identify these events, shared new evidence with the NRC and its advisory committee regarding the loophole. Again, the committee recommended that no action, despite dissent from the patient's advocates on the committee, who wrote there is no justification for treating an extravasation that exceeds reporting limits differently than any other medical event. And in 2020, the company filed a petition for rulemaking that officially asked the non-regulatory committees to close the loophole and to treat significant events the same as any other medical event, which is what they should be doing. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which is United Nations, recommended monitoring, documenting, and reporting these events. And considering the petition, the NRC's medical staff appears to be tilting towards favoring the opinion of nuclear medicine practitioners the staff is supposed to be overseeing. So the International Atomic Energy Agency and the nuclear regulatories all agreed this should be kept secret. And the non-regulatory committee medical staff opened public review of preliminary findings for just 20 days. The analyst shows that the NRC findings predominantly parrot positions of the advisory committee and affiliated societies, such as requiring patients to determine whether a procedure was done correctly, requiring reporting only if a patient experienced permanent functional damage or taken no action whatsoever. I actually almost had to go vomit after I found that story. It was so unnerving. The implications for it, to call it a genocide is underplaying it. It's outrageous murder. To inject it right into your veins, 3, 4, 5 sieverts, right into your veins. They're why we invented baseball bats. We didn't invent baseball bats for baseball. We invented it for monsters. They should be sentenced to death by baseball bats. Rosatom Healthcare conducts webinar on how innovations in nuclear medicine is revolutionizing healthcare. So we see the nuclear industry, instead of a nuclear war of dropping bombs, the nuclear war is injecting you with nuclear waste. Instead of storing nuclear waste in a repository a mile underground, they stick it into you. Probably one of the cruelest things imaginable is to inject somebody with radiation. It's truly one of the cruelest things you can do. It's an incredible, hideous organization, the nuclear industry. It's a death cult and a secret society. It has no right to exist. I advocating exterminating them before they exterminate you. Explained how nuclear medicine technology is being increasingly adopted across the world. In the old days, they used to use radioactive suppositories. They used to use radioactive vases, and they wanted you to fill the vase up with water, let it sit so the water become radioactive, and drink it. And what the outcome of that is your jaws would drop off from cancer. They made radioactive makeup for children. They hired children to paint little radioactive dots on watches for pilots to go bomb communities in other countries. And all the children got sick that done that. They made radioactive makeup, radioactive lipstick for women was very popular, and glow-in-the-dark radiation, and everybody got sick and died from it. They call it therapeutic. If someone come up to me in the industry and said, "Dana, you're wrong, it's therapeutic," they would never say that to another person for the rest of their short life, I can guarantee you. The renewable energy sources we have are in the ascendant, while nuclear is a pipe dream. Well, renewable energies are exploding in every direction, despite the fact that the industry is now jacking up the prices on the materials. And nuclear is, this is Australia, and nuclear is a pipe dream. And Australia is a prime spot, incredible prime spot. I mean, endless deserts for solar, endless mountains for wind, where the wind blows all the time on your mountains. But they want to put it at sea level where there's not as much wind, so that it doesn't work. So they could use compressed air storage so you dig big tunnels, mine shafts, and you compress air down there with extra energy, so you have peak power and you have extra power when the wind or the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining. And then pumped hydro. And Australia is probably one of the best spots on the planet to do that kind of technology. But Australia is one of the best planets also for tidal and for geothermal. They don't even try. They're not even trying. They're trying to find ways to demonize what exists and promote something like small modular reactors that don't exist. They're sabotaging our planet, and the effects now are an extinction event. Japan to implement compensation rules for losses by Fukushima rumors. Japan to implement, not only what they're talking about is they're going to open up the fishery. They're going to be they're allegedly going to dump water in the ocean from tanks that are empty. Again, these tanks would be 1.4 million sieverts, minimum of just gamma per tank. And so when you add in alpha and beta and neutrons, you're talking about 700 or 800 million, but say 7,000 sieverts, 7 million sieverts per tank, for instance. Which means you can't build another tank on site anywhere because you can't get near it. So the fact that you see all these tanks alongside of each other, because the tanks are not thick enough to shield you from a quarter mile away. So how could you build another tank there? The industry is a perpetual liar, is what all the industry does. The Japanese, now so they're claiming they're going to dump water in the ocean that doesn't exist. And they're claiming that if it hurts the industries down there, the fishery industry, what they're going to do is buy the fish off the fishermen, keep fishing, keep farming right alongside the nuclear waste. We'll buy the fish and we'll freeze it, we'll find markets and we'll ship it out. Canada lifted all restrictions after 90 days. So June 2011, Canada stabbed everybody on the planet in the face, the nuclear industry, and also then immediately allocated $12 billion for Darlington nuclear power plants in Canada and $12 billion for the Bruce Power facilities in Canada, nuclear facilities. So they diluted the Canadian funds to fund the industry before the population woke up, and to make sure they wouldn't be able to resist, they let all the radioactive food into the country. So when you had 55 countries blocking the food, Canada being the only country that was letting it in, what do you think Japan's response was? Let's ship more to Canada. And they have done everything on the planet to make sure you can't find out about it. In fact, tomorrow night's show is on that topic itself to give you a real insight on why that's an issue. You can't call it treated water because there's no way to treat it. You can't filter radioactive water. The filter is so radioactive after 20 minutes, the water that's going through it is now more radioactive than when it comes out than when it goes in. Calling it treated and calling the plant crippled. When the minute you see the word treated in an article when it comes to radiation from Fukushima and crippled, you know it's a propaganda. It's 100% propaganda. And that the people that wrote the article in the future, we need to hold them accountable. They need to go to jail for doing what they're doing. And preferably, they should get the death penalty. Everybody in the nuclear industry participated in this cover-up should get the death penalty. And should be death by radiation. The action plan includes having the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a captured agency, but it's United Nations. So it doesn't matter because they're the military-industrial complex. Their job is misery. That's what they do. They create misery. There is no example of them doing good. The government will also set up a fund using 30 billion yen, $261 million, to buy the food. And promote online sales of the product by fishery groups. Online sales. Incredible betrayal. Implement the measures swiftly and steadily. And have as many consumers as possible be aware of the safety of the processed water. So they're talking about a major propaganda again. More than 1 million tons of treated. You can't treat the water. And crippled. Triple meltdown. It was 4 buildings that melted down, not 3. The water is treated using an advanced liquid processing system I showed you earlier, the ALP system. In 2014, didn't work. And there was no hope in the near future. Therefore, if it didn't work by then, it didn't work now. But we know that if you start putting this 2.2 sieverts per liter through a filter, within a short few hours, there's going to be tens of thousands of sieverts. And so the water that's going in at 2.2 sieverts is going to come out the other end at dozens of sieverts per liter. Right? Because you can't filter radiation because radiation has this weird attribute. And talking about tritium, every time I hear the word tritium, I just literally want to scream because of the propaganda. And then claim that which is said to pose few health risks. Actually, tritium is really, really bad. And it's just tritiated, it's radioactive water. You can't end up with tritium, by the way, from 2.2 sieverts a liter. You know what I mean? Like, you can't get rid of all these elements and just end up with the tritiated water they're talking about would still be 2.2 sieverts an hour. So it's like this, like if I radiated metal, if I take a piece of metal, I bombard it with neutrons, it gets 2.2 sieverts, say per pound. I can't minimize that. I can't bring that number magically down. And water is the same way. You can't filter radiation the way they're claiming they are. The plan also includes holding online surveys targeting victims, consumers in South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and everywhere. Treated. As soon as you hear the word treated, that person should be arrested immediately in jail for the rest of their natural life. And if they're egregious propaganda, they should be stuffed with fuel rods. And food products from Fukushima prefecture. Please don't eat stuff from Japan. Please don't eat stuff from Fukushima prefecture. And please tell the people that are trying to sell it to you that you disrespect them and that you're going to start protests and ban people from fish or buying their product. Please tell them that you're going to sue them for everybody that ends up with cancer in the next year in that community. Lifting the, again, Taipei Times. What a hateful betrayal that newspaper is. What a disgusting, hateful newspaper. Trying to manipulate people in the country to importing radioactive food so they can poison everybody so Taiwan can be in a trade pact with Japan? What kind of sickness are these people? And they don't put their names on the article, of course, because it's the nuclear industry. Many countries retain bans on imports of excess of caution, but gradually lifted them, with Canada allowing the imports in 2011. Bragging about Canada being stupid or controlled by the nuclear industry. New Zealand done it in 2011 or 2012. Australia lifted the ban in 2014. That should humiliate you if you're from Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. And that should terrify you if they import food into your country. The Philippines in 2019. This year, Singapore lifted all measures. The EU eased it on its own, while the US lifted its ban in September. We covered all of this. No media in the United States reported that, by the way. How come? No media in the United States reported in September that the US has lifted the ban on 14 prefectures. Not just Fukushima, but half of Japan, the food is banned in 55 countries. And America just magically said, oh, we're going to lift it in September. And then American media, Fox, CNN, BBC, nobody on the planet, only the Japan's media reported on it. So the nuclear industry is extremely powerful that is able to manipulate it that way. In Asia, China, South Korea, Taiwan still have a ban in place. The only smart places on the entire planet. Canada lifts restrictions on Japanese food imports. That was the only one in Canada that reported on it. June the 14th, 2011. 90 days after the nuclear meltdowns. Japan exports of farm and fishery products to Canada pre-lifting the ban 2010 was 4.6 billion yen, which was $51 million Canada. But what happened was that all the other countries have banned the food. Canada was one of the few places where Japan could ship it. So Canada would have got bombarded. It would have been $5 billion worth of food coming into the country. So everybody gets sick and they call it coronavirus. Opinion: Germany is closing its last nuclear plant. What a mistake. Well, first off, the Washington Post is extremely controlled by the nuclear industry. This is one of the plants in Germany surrounded by farms. And that's the picture they show you on the cover, is a nuclear plant surrounded by farms. That should terrify you. They don't put their name on it per se, by the editorial boards. A little more than 10 years ago, the world held its breath as Japan authorities struggled to contain. Well, first off, they didn't struggle to contain it. We got the documentation. They ran away from it. An accident. They built it on a fault line where they knew this was going to happen. An accident that occurred at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station in Japan. At the time, many observers wondered whether nuclear power, with its radioactive emissions, not waste, radioactive emissions, how they should explain it, and meltdown risks were worth continuing to use. A virtually carbon-free energy. So again, you see a media like the Washington Post, democracy dies in the darkness. See that up there under the Washington Post? Democracy dies in the darkness. And they are the darkest. They are vicious, hateful scum. They are mass murderers. Technology, the world needs to slash greenhouse emissions. Again, energy prices soared. That was on purpose to get the EU, the people in the EU, to push for nuclear. That's on purpose what we see happening. The country struggles to cut its carbon dioxide emissions. Carbon dioxide doesn't heat up the planet. Coal, gas, and oil emissions don't create plumes that cover the entire planet. This is a plutonium plume from Fukushima based on TEPCO's numbers. It pulses energy at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, every second. Entire plumes covering the entire planet. Government made hastily in the wake of Fukushima. Not hastily. She was actually a nuclear physicist in Germany who made the decision to... Like, the numbers worldwide were incredible. The plume covered the entire planet in 30 days. A continuous plume, pulsing energy. And so it looks like this. This is France's model of the plume. That's the Pacific Ocean over there. This is the Atlantic Ocean right there. So this model is 17 days. And 17. Now, just because the model stopped, do you think that plume stopped? The model is only based on venting. It's not based on the actual multiple nuclear meltdowns emissions and inventories. And what's really bizarre about this story is there's no academics worldwide there's so many nuclear scientists and nuclear students, for goodness sakes, and retired nuclear academics, etc., could do such a better job of explaining this than I could ever hope to do. And not one of them's ever spoken out. Not one. Not a single one. And the ones that did become public downplayed every facet of this. Claimed that's not real. Claimed that there was no adverse side effects from radiation. The list goes, it's incredible. And I'm not going to sit in silence, and I'm not going to tolerate these scumbags and degenerates and monsters on my planet. I have nothing but contempt for everybody in the nuclear industry because they remain silent. They refuse to gut up and be human. I've never seen a nuclear academic that has attributes of humanity. Not one. In fact, every one of them should be painted yellow. Their hair should be dyed yellow. Their faces should be painted yellow, or they should be shot on sight. And that way people can avoid them and ostracize them. And they should all be jailed forever for what they got done. And you will agree with that if you knew the truth. Pleased, long-time anti-nuclear activists. Pleased, long-time. So as if the anti-nuclear activists were just bullies or something, right? See, labeling you is how they denigrate you, how they disregard, it's a categorizing of you, but it's a derogatory thing. It's you're trying to save their future and everybody else's future. But clearer heads warned that then Chancellor Angela Merkel's decision was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. She had the moral high ground. Scumbag Japan helped build scumbag Bill Gates' high-tech nuclear reactor, which is a sodium reactor. Same reactor, by the way, that melted down at Santa Susana and the other one on Lake Superior. And the one in Santa Susana emitted 460 times more radiation than 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island had huge cancer clusters. Massive amounts of pets died because people left them behind. And that there's actually studies on 3 Mile Island where they claim 2 million people got radiated, all right? But it was like watching color television for an extra year. And so these people should be beaten to death with baseball bats, whoever created those studies. Legally, of course. Or not. The Japan Atomic Energy Agency and the scum degenerate piece of shit Mitsubishi Heavy Industries are set to cooperate with the United States because the United States nuclear industry is too stupid to do it. And Bill Gates' venture, sure, the United States is throwing $3 billion of the taxpayers' money at this idiotic, that failed, of course, at Los Alamos National Laboratories, at Sandina and the rest of the places where they already done this. It's simply not going to work. It's a distraction to make the nuclear industry look good for a few extra seconds here and there. The report said, citing multiple unidentified sources. Why you got identified sources for? Terrorist power, an advanced nuclear power venture by terrorist Gates, scumbag Gates, is set to open its Natrium plant in Wyoming in 2028. Look, first off, the industry's never built a reactor on schedule, ever. Never even come close to it. They haven't even done the survey work. It takes about 5 years. It's 100% propaganda. The U.S. government will provide fundings to cover half of the $4 billion project. But the other numbers we got is $3 billion. Japan, on the other hand, has a bitter history of decommissioning its Manju prototype. That reactor it was built with no way to decommission it. These salt reactors, if air gets in there, it detonates. If water gets in there, it detonates. Imagine how stupid you are to build something when eventually air is going to get in there. You can't decommission it without air getting in there, by the way. And if air goes in there, it'll detonate right on the spot. And you have a major nuclear meltdown going on. Provided no results in years of controversy, and the project, they said, cost $8.5 billion with no way to decommission it. 0 ways, right? Which is the same one they're going to build, the Manju reactor that they're going to allegedly build in Wyoming. And by 2026, 95% of the grid will be renewables. Why would you even bother with this dirty energy industry? It just murders industry. The Manju facility saw accidents, regulatory breaches, and cover-ups since its inception, and was closed following public distrust of the nuclear energy. Japan closed all of its nuclear power plants, over 50 nuclear power plants after Fukushima, and spent the last 10 years now poisoning our entire ecosystems worldwide. There's a model of it right there, look. Another model of the radioactive fallout covering the entire planet. First off, robots can't work in a highly radioactive environment. We've seen in this robot, you hear it's how do you put it? It's a sensationalism, right? Oh, they're going to send in the robots. Really? That's cool. I love robots. That's the average person reaction, right? Robots are fantastic. They're garbage when it comes to nuclear. They're pointless. They can't do nothing. You're talking 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures at the Meltdowns. But you're also talking millions of sieverts. right? So the electronics are fried before you can even get close to it. It's meant to disarm you and disenfranchise you from reality, by the way. The scumbags operators at the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant is planning to conduct robotic probes and collect samples. I'm not even going to read it. These are degenerates. Preparation to retrieve fuel debris from the number 2 reactor. Of course, they faked reactor 4, and we covered that many, many times. Reactor 3, we covered that yesterday at the very beginning of the video, if you're not familiar with it. With a robotic device that was developed in the UK. Of course, United Kingdom, has been hemorrhaging into the Atlantic Ocean 8 million litres a day at their meltdown, their mixed oxide fuel meltdown in Sellafield, which used to be called Windscale, by the way. They changed the name because when the reactor melted down, they didn't call nuclear scientists in, or volunteers from nuclear power plants, or nuclear universities, or nuclear corporations. They went out with buses to the theaters with guns and kidnapped the back rows of the people at the theater. Back in the 50s, the poor people sat in the back rows, right? Brought them into a nuclear meltdown to push the fuel rods out of the reactor. Imagine, they didn't get nuclear scientists, no nuclear academics. Imagine, like in Fukushima, nuclear power plants worldwide didn't volunteer to go and help at the nuclear meltdown. Imagine they closed every nuclear power plant in Japan and none of the employees, the hundreds of thousands of employees, went to Fukushima. Because they're not stupid. Here's United Kingdom. Farms right by the nuclear meltdowns. Surrounded by farms. Shutting down nuclear option to cut emissions. The closure. Oh, that's Huntington B there, rather. I'm sorry. Not Sellafield, Huntington B. Surrounded by farms. This is absurd. Like, if I go back, say, 10 years and somebody told me that nuclear power plants were surrounded by farms, we're like, nah, they would. Nobody's that evil. My goodness, that can't be true. And I look it up and look, holy crap, it's actually surrounded by farms. But it's way worse than that. All nuclear power plants that I found were surrounded by farms. Hang on. I'll give you a small example because it's hard to believe it. I know you're thinking, oh, Dana, go on, that can't be true. And I can't blame you for thinking that way. I don't blame you for thinking that way, that's for sure. Now, they know that the radiation is going to be sucked up by the farms. Hang on. Let me just make you understand something. So these are nuclear power plants, and they all have one thing in common. They're surrounded by farms. And so the radiation is sucked up by the food. And then you eat the food and get sick and die. And your friends and your families and everybody else you invited over for a nice family dinner gets sick and dies. Is that evil, or is that just me? Or am I just being a big baby? Suck up your radiation and die, Dana. Do it for the nuclear industry, Dana. And we know the food sucks up the radiation because we have endless studies on it. Uptake of cesiums and strontium by grapevines, by strawberries, by wheat, edible wheat, by tomato plants, fruit plants, all suck. All these studies, do you think they don't know they exist? And potatoes, and tree roots, and they got all these studies on meadow ecosystems sucking up radiation and fruit trees sucking up radiation. So what's the possibility that they don't know that these farms surrounding nuclear power plants are going to suck up the radiation? That's Chalk River, by the way, surrounded by farms. That still has an ongoing nuclear meltdown, one of the first ones in Canada. Surrounded by farms. So when you start seeing that in almost every single picture, should that not worry you? Like, this is one of the scariest pictures imaginable. People living alongside of a nuclear power plant. What a despicable, wicked, hateful, evil, twisted, sadistic, vicious, maniacal, sadistic is the better word, I guess, creepy, hateful industry. How demented are you to build a nuclear power plant in farmlands? Oh, look, the farmers put their fields too close to the nuclear power plant, Dana. No, the nuclear power plant put their plants in the middle of farmer country because they knew that was the quickest way to stop the bioaccumulation of radiation around the nuclear power plants, is have the food suck it up, and then the food is shipped out regularly and it poisons the people that eats it. If that's not evil, what the hell is? Really? That's some sickness there you're looking at. That's some incredible, twisted sickness to do that, my goodness. And communities also. Just a coincidence, Dana. Now, it's not a coincidence that they know how deadly this is. 50 becquerels a kilogram is irreversible heart problems for children and lesions for adults and their organs. Future nuclear power plants in the United Kingdom? You guessed it, surrounded by farmland. Shutting down nuclear option to cut emission. Huntington B, which was the story we were covering earlier. And Huntington B, of course, is surrounded by farmland. Just cure how a local doctor ended up helping the children of Chernobyl. Just cure. It's considered the worst nuclear disaster in history in both cost and casualties. Of course, if the official number is 28, but all 600 helicopter pilots died, for goodness sakes. And I'd done a presentation not very long ago here on my site of Fukushima through the eyes of Chernobyl. I also put a whole lot of academic studies up at my website, a couple of hundred of them last week on Chernobyl itself. And Chernobyl's brutal, but it's nothing compared to Fukushima. It's literally nothing. And don't get me wrong, Chernobyl was evil. They actually closed 9,000 farms in Ireland and Scotland and the United Kingdom. So Fukushima, you got 13,646 children with tumors out of 40,000. Pre-Fukushima was 1 in a million to 2 per million with tumors. So when you scale it up, you're talking about 358,000 per million. Top UN radiation official claims Fukushima not expected to have any serious impacts on people's health. And of course, obviously, this is a catastrophic numbers. That's the equivalent of a meteorite hitting planet Earth. Concerned half of Japan to be covered in nuclear waste. 60 and older should be prepared to die at Fukushima nuclear power plant. So if your coal plant breaks down, should 60 and older be prepared to die across your country? If your gas plant breaks down, should 60 and older be prepared to die? If your oil plant breaks down, should 60 and older be prepared to die? Of course not. If your nuclear plant breaks down, 60 and older should be prepared to be sacrificed. It's absurd. People that work all their lives now should have their lives exterminated so the nuclear industry doesn't get a black eye. 6 in 10 Fukushima children tested to have diabetes. If your coal plant breaks down, are you going to have 6 to 10 of your children with diabetes? Do you think that's a joke? Do you think that's irrelevant? Do you think that's not catastrophic? You think that stops at diabetes, by the way? It means they're poisoned and compromised permanently. To call Chernobyl the worst nuclear disaster in history is not an accident. We've been covering this forever. All the media worldwide regurgitates the same narrative without, even if it doesn't have a reason, it'll include that little tidbit. And it'll be framed exactly the same way, word for word, verbatim. A Canadian team of 4 other medical specialists traveling 15 hours multiple time zones to Kyiv, Ukraine. See, the fact that they called Chernobyl the world's worst nuclear accident, the rest of the story doesn't really matter because they told that particular lie. It's impossible to trust them, see? Right? How can you trust them after you tell that lie? And so that media, the Interior News, they should have a fuel rod shoved up their, you know what. Amid Iran nuke talks, Rapid Israel has capabilities many cannot even imagine. Oh, we can imagine. We know what they got 5 million refugees in Palestine, for goodness sakes. 5 million. They can't get rid of 10,000 Taliban or 10,000 Hamas. Are radioactive wildfires next on California's apocalyptic climate change guest list? Yeah, California was pounded with radioactive fallout. You know, and so was the rest of the planet. Here's another model of it. Right? And so California is right there with my fingers to. Yeah, it got pounded. So, but all of the continent got pounded, the whole planet. And so it kills the bacteria in the forest. So when you have forest fires, they're much more intense. But anyway, this was written by a school kid. So the media was like, let's get that out there, full of misrepresentations. Somebody trying to do something good was sucked in by the evil nuclear industry and started regurgitating their narratives. And here's yet another possible hazard that has been largely unaccounted for is the smoke releases from wildfires is radiation. Well, we talk about it all the time. Fukushima forecast large radiation cloud nearing California. So yeah, it's going to be releasing radiation, but they're going to blame it on weapons fallout. They're going to blame it on a new study in New Mexico found that mice exposed to smoke from a prolonged period from a wildfire 600 miles away showed signs of age-related chemical changes in their brain tissue. No, that was Fukushima, not the smoke causing the problems. Radioactive rain caused 130 schools in Korea to close. But what they're talking about for California was weapons fallout. Again, refusing to acknowledge Fukushima exists. At the height of the Fukushima emergency, regions in California where the plume hit had no monitors. And that the email showed the EPA decided not to deploy the RadNet to the area. Only one left broke as the radioactivity began spiking. So no clue about the exposure levels. It's inexplicable, the watchdog said, that the EPA shut down Fukushima radiation monitoring after finding high levels of radiation in the drinking water. The New York Times contributor confirmed California rainwater was 181 times above the drinking water standards for iodine-131. And there would have been 10 times more iodine-132, 30 times more iodine-133, 31 times more iodine-129. The iodine-132 and 133, by the way, are 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating your thyroid glands and insects and birds and animals and mammals' thyroid glands than the 131 is. And the iodine-131 is extremely effective at ionizing and radiating your thyroid gland. What that means is your body takes those iodines and converts them into hormones. And that's distributed through all of your body, and that causes absurd autoimmune deficiencies and illnesses and injuries. Discharges of Fukushima nuclear material into the Pacific Ocean has effectively contaminated the sea, the entire sea. Well, once again, we're not going to get through everything we got there. Biden told Putin several times nuclear war must not start. Yeah, well, why you got endless planes, endless submarines, endless nuclear weapons then? Bringing nuclear fusion to Cyprus is not the key to sustainable energy. Right? This is panic. The industry is panicking because by 2026, renewables will displace all nuclear reactors, outputs, and fossil fuels worldwide. Britain under pressure to follow Joe Biden's plan to honor nuclear test veterans. 70 years later, nuclear test veterans that are still alive are spat on for getting sick during nuclear testing, which was on purpose so they can study them. According to the documents we covered, was on purpose. They poisoned the veterans so they can study long-term impacts of radiation exposures. And Boris down there, gutless Boris, he should look the veterans in the face and tell them they're not sick. UK nuclear bomb test veterans were victims of a crime, with one suffering over 100 tumors. And they have 10 times more children born with birth defects than the normal population. And the nuclear industry has made sure they get no help. Zero. Zilch. Nothing. We see that throughout the entire planet, this incredible contempt for doing the right thing. Chinese nuclear power operator launches offshore wind farm. Why not put it up on the mountains where the wind blows all the time? Trudeau botched job serves up brilliant opportunity for the cowardly conservatives. Will he take advantage? Well, what it is that guy you see there, he's anti-nuclear. Right? And they wanted to point him in some key positions. And so the pro-nuclear community, the same ones who lifted all restrictions on radioactive food 90 days after nuclear meltdown started in Japan, are demonizing him because he's in a position of authority. It's absurd. The whole story is absurd. You have to read it. And Denver, Dr. Sheer Story survived in Chernobyl accident 35 years ago. And she became a doctor, and I actually went back and helped some of the victims. The U.S. submarine docked in Gibraltar was attacked by ecologists who wanted to edit the country in case something went wrong. They didn't want their country contaminated. That's probably one of the smartest things imaginable to get rid of that. And scumbags, Europe falling into a trap of green energy policy. We're not going to get to that. We're going to give it up here right now. We're going to give it up, and we got through most of it tonight. That was really good. I can't remember how much we had here. 580 or something. 560. 560 we made it to. We made it to 400 and something. Yeah, we made it to 470. So we're 100 shy. That's okay. So we had a fundraiser last night, and I should have done another fundraiser tonight. We might do another fundraiser tomorrow night. Let me thank everybody that donated. We got to go all the way back until December 25th to cover it. Just give me a second here. Okay, here we go. Robert F. donated $8 on December 25th. Guy F. donated $20 December 27th. Stephen W. donated $50 on December the 31st. Cough Mixture donated $17 on December the 31st. Colette S. donated $150 last night. Layla B. donated $30 last night. And James L. donated $60 last night. And so that's a huge boost for me. And I didn't get out in the woods today. It was too cold. I didn't even leave the house, of course. It's just too cold. And I needed rest. I was burnt out. I didn't take any time off during Christmas. I didn't do any shows for a few days to give you guys a few days off. Last year, I didn't do any shows until January the 6th was the first show I done last year. But this year, we got so much bad news that we got to come out and try to get rid of some of it. And tomorrow night, I already got tomorrow night's show, good to go. But we also got to cover 2021 recap to get through in the next number of weeks. And so we got to get through 240,000 clicks. So I got to go through all of that, pick out the most salacious stuff in increments over the next month. So I got absurd amount of work ahead of me. We're looking at more snow on Friday and Saturday without the brutal temperatures, hopefully. And so I'll be out doing research expeditions looking for tracks in the snow. And I might get out tomorrow. Temperature is supposed to, because it's minus 22 last night. So the temperature today was minus 13 or something. And that's wind chill, right? But still, I mean, you open the door up, you know it's miserably cold. And so we can't take the quad out in those types of conditions. Even though I was out yesterday morning and it was just brutal cold. And so I'm very grateful to everybody that donated. We got to have another fundraiser. We might wait till Sunday to do that next one. And we got a poll tonight that we never covered. So the poll is Fukushima radioactive fallout an imminent threat to humanity and 8 million species? We have 92% of 51 votes, a resounding yes. And we're going to end the poll. We got 51 votes. So we're going to end the poll on 92%. Resounding yes. And I'd rather people didn't send people to other people's channels. On my channel, I work really hard to get people to come to my site. And I don't think it's fair to send them to their other channel, other people's channel. And especially since I've been censored so heavily, it's so difficult to get someone to come to my channel. And I don't send people to other channels until I vent them myself. So I go check them out before I recommend sending people to other people's channels. No offense, William, but it's not the right thing to do. What you might consider good information could easily be propaganda. Yeah, that should have been 8. You're falling into a trap of green energy. Well, you got me thrown off now. Nothing personal, right? Don't take it personal, but we can't go sending people to channels that I don't vent first. Richard, Ease, P, Swear, Robert, Albert. Port Angeles. Good night, everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. I'll most likely be in the woods tomorrow looking for tracks. Japan has wiped out the species. And we're trying to find what's left. Mike. Just quickly run up through the names in the comments section. Good night to everybody else just sitting back and watching the show and joining us later. Hugs for everybody. YouTube, Yoda. James Lucid. Hi, James. Thank you again. James Mangan. My goodness, I always butchers your name, don't I? My apologies. Shayla White. Hi, Shayla. Provoke. Dwayne. Colette S. Extra hugs for Colette. Thank you, honey. So much. John 2H. We come back down to the most recent comments. Thank you, Mike. Well, I like to vent everything myself. It's okay. Chelsea, you're welcome, Chelsea. Thank you. Blue Jay Outpost. Yeah, but like you say, I have learned over the years myself that I don't really promote anybody outside of Kevin Blanche. And Thomas Ackerman, of course, who I don't promote as much as I used to, even though I should. He's an amazing individual. And he's been going to war for everybody for 10 years straight. Thanks, James. Good night, everybody. God bless everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody hopefully tomorrow night if everything goes good. I got the show ready for tomorrow night so I can go in the woods tomorrow and still do a show tomorrow night, hopefully. It depends, right? Because when you're in there at minus 10 degrees temperatures for 4 or 5 or 6 hours hunting for species, it's exhausting. It's actually physically exhausting. And your body is so cold, right? And remind everybody, there's 2 links at the bottom of the description for people to donate. That's the only 2 ways you can donate to me. Just so you know that that's the only 2 ways to do it. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Have a great night and a great day. God bless and hugs for everybody. Take care, folks.